Religion is one of those concepts that has been around for quite a bit. Archaeologists have found proof of ceremonial burials going as far back as 300,000 years ago, and affecting not just humans, aka Homo sapiens, but even Neanderthals and Homo naledi. The argument is that religion does tend to exist in a lot of societies to address a very critical question: what happens when you die? And hence, a ritual after someone is dead is at least some evidence that people have started asking the question. However, we also have to address that just because they have burials isn't exactly the best proof of religious belief. After all, atheists still attend funerals, and even some animals like elephants bury their dead. After which you start entering the whole what even is religion debate. But the good news for us is that as time goes forward, and especially as we start entering the time period covered by Paradox Interactive games, this question gets less controversial, thankfully. It's a bit hard to claim something isn't a religion when you start building temples after all, and it gets even easier when people figure out writing. And after writing down the obligatory "Greg was here" and "I own this tree is mine," we start getting religious texts, and once you wrote down "I believe in X religion," it's a bit hard to argue it's not a religion. And indeed, throughout human history, religion has played a very significant role, from dictating the calendar you use to determining when the weekend is. And considering how many events in history, ranging from the Crusades to the European Wars of religion, were impacted by faith, it's certainly a big topic. I mean, for the last one, it's even in the name. Now, before we get into the rest of the video where we look how Paradox Interactive models this entirely uncontroversial mechanic that has zero controversy ever, we have a couple of things to get out of the way. A like on the video would be appreciated, and a subscription would be amazing. We have begun demolishing the subcalls recently, meaning that it's time to aim high and go for 42k, or 1,000 times the answer to the universe itself. Now then, back to religion, and we begin today by looking at the Crusader Kings series. Well, right in the name of the game itself, Crusader Kings acknowledges how the Crusades were a big part of the history of this period, in question by mentioning them in the title. Literally surface level analysis aside, and starting with the Crusader Kings 2 map, since it happens to be slightly earlier than the CK3 one, well, during this period we see religion emerging as a dominant unifying force throughout Europe and the beyond. The Catholic Church dominates Italy, France, and the British Isles, and would historically in this time period expand its domain into Germany through the conquest of Charlemagne, into the Baltic and Polish regions through the Northern Crusades, and of course into Iberia through the Reconquista. But the Catholic Church wasn't the only large bastion of religious belief. To the east, the still Christian but now very separate Orthodox Church dominates the Byzantine Empire, although one has to admit that much like the Byzantines themselves, constantly entering civil wars, their religion wasn't much better, as it was about to enter that whole iconoclasm debate. And like every debate in the Byzantine Empire, people met around, had a nice chat, and just kidding, no, they stabbed people they disagreed with until the survivors were declared correct. Finally, Islam at this point emerged from the Middle East, and goes on an absolute warpath across Egypt, Persia, and even gives Constantinople a go in 678. They fail, and say screw it, let's walk to it the long way around and conquer Spain. This isn't actually a joke. Again, Al-Tabari, I probably mispronounced that, a Muslim scholar and historian that lived during this time period, would attribute the following quote to Caliph Uthman: "Only through Spain can Constantinople be conquered. If you conquer Spain, you will share the reward of those who conquer Constantinople." Which first of all explains a lot about the AI pathfinding decisions. But before going and call them ignorant, bear in mind that map making as a whole was very much in its infancy, so we're using innovative world maps like this one. Now if you're wondering where is anything on here? Don't worry, the thing in the bottom left, that's the Great Britain, where Scotland is basically an island floating off. England is shoved right into the French coast, and that almost separate island to the bottom of England is Wales. Now those random islands floating below England? Oh, that's Ireland, of course, and yes, this is why Spain is on the way to Constantinople if you leave from Baghdad. We will take no further questions. To be clear, they didn't actually have battle maps in this. This map was more of a religious project, and hence geographical accuracy didn't matter, since the point of the map was to show Jerusalem and Christ in the middle. No one was using this to navigate anywhere in the real world, don't worry. This map is for, and I quote, theological navigation. So here's an actual navigation map from basically the same time period. It's still not great, but as you can see, this is a lot more usable. This was made in Sicily, which is why Sicily looks like the most important thing ever on this one. But there you go. Anyway, oops, we ended up talking about maps instead of religion. Sorry, back on topic regarding the actual game now. And frankly, Crusader Kings 2 sets the standards for the demonstration of religion incredibly highly. Religion is one of the most important traits an individual can possess, for lack of a better word, outlining how they interact with the rest of the world. Having the same religion is grounds for initial common ground, while the difference in religion is grounds for animosity, unless other factors get in the way of both of these developments. Religious lines are important for marriage's internal policy, and much like how faith were a dominating force during the world at this point, this is very much reflected in the game. Everything from the importance of being endorsed by your realm priest to having an easier time waging wars of expansion against heathens and heretics, then justifying raising arms against people of your same faith, are all present throughout the game. The game furthermore does not shy away from even more controversial topics like the persecution of Jews during this time period, even highlighting how it was often done for economic reasons, or through event chains showing how people would often blame Jews for events such as plagues. Indeed, the system for heresies, if successful enough, itself overtaking the original religion and becoming the dominant confession, is very forward-thinking and impressively dynamic. Crusades and jihads are present and well implemented. A critique of the AI may occur during the, for lack of a better word, lack of organization during the Crusades in Crusader Kings 3, but I'd argue that is kind of historical accuracy. Yes, the first Crusade, for the most part, worked quite well and stayed on target. By the time we actually hit the fourth Crusade, I mean, we're attacking the wrong religion entirely. Further out afield from the main play area, we also have all the content they had for Indian religions, and that whole cauldron of Buddhist, Muslim, Hindu, and Jain faith, as well as all the pagan mechanics that enabled Reformation. I'm looking at you, Tengri and Norse. Frankly, it is insanely well done, with loads of events added to make the game feel truly dynamic. Hiring your Jewish courtier as a Christian lord will sometimes give you buffs, like the spread of science. But also, if you ever do choose to expel the Jews, well, they will leave too. And Crusader Kings 3 does not drop the ball on this one. While I'm still awaiting a Crusader Kings 3 expansion for the Hordes, and frankly, Republics, that is, well, a topic for a CK3 future wishlist. I do have to say that Hordes as well as Tengri needing a religion overhaul are needed, but with that said, I have to admit that the CK3 system of genuinely even more dynamic religion processes with tenets of the religion that change over time, or more specifically due to the reformations that you as a player can control, is incredibly well done. And again, this incredibly dynamic system includes tenets like Eastern syncretism, as an example to show how some faiths were considered closer to other religions than outright evil heathens. Overall, I would like to compliment the system here, but if I must make a critique, I believe that for a truly historical experience, if one can be even claim that, religious conversion on a province level needs to be slowed down. This is ironically enough an option in the game settings, and it is Iron Man compatible in both CK2 and CK3, so I'd recommend it if you're seeking a quote-unquote more realistic experience, but I do have to agree that unironically, from the case to a point of making the game more fun, keeping the conversion speed as is just a more enjoyable time. Furthermore, for CK3, an expansion of a missionary going into foreign lands mechanic would be quite good, and a switch to a percentage system of a population chart for local provinces would be a better representation. So dealing with a 100k people live here, 70% have religion X and 30% have religion Y would be a better system than we currently have, since at the moment a province is either 100% Catholic or 100% Sunni, no in between. The same can be said for cultures, but this is a religion video, not a culture video. With that said, the current system of each province has a religion is quite functional and frankly perfectly playable. Overall, I will be giving CK3 and CK2 a very solid 9 out of 10, if not higher, implementation of religion into the game. And with that, we move to EU4. Religion here was historically relevant. Let's go with relevant. Europe remained the main character here, but certain developments would, shall we say, inspire Europe to bring European warfare and religion to the rest of the world. And of course, Europe would not do this as a united force. Spain, Portugal, and to a lesser but present extent, France would bring the Catholic confession to the New World, Africa, Australia, and to a lesser extent Asia. But Britain and the Dutch would establish Protestant colonies too. And here I'm grouping Calvinism, Anglicanism, and all the other flavors of Reformation into Protestant, to be clear. And indeed, addressing the elephant in the room, this time period saw the Protestant Reformation, one of the most significant religious shifts within Christendom as a whole, rivaling the split between East and West. The Protestant Reformation and the subsequent conflicts had a genuinely civilization-level impact on international politics and humanity. And this isn't an exaggeration or more Eurocentrism. At the end of the War of the Religious League, a series of treaties that became known as the Peace of Westphalia were signed. And it was in these treaties that the very concept of statehood and sovereignty was first codified. And to be clear, the very concept of each state has exclusive sovereignty of its territory was born here. Now, modern scholars do debate this and argue that the treaties themselves were actually limiting sovereignty. However, that's scholars arguing. I'm going to go with the conventional interpretation. But to be clear, before the Treaties of Westphalia, we could have had a Prussia that was nominally a vassal of both Poland and the Holy Roman Empire, and indeed how the Holy Roman Emperor could be king of all Germans, apart from the Germans currently inside a church, as clerical holdings were protected by the Pope. This concept of exclusive national sovereignty lasted beyond 1821, to be clear, and that's just the stuff happening inside Christianity. Islam would continue their conquest. Sikh as a faith would emerge during this period in India, and of course the fall of Byzantium would give Moscow the freedom to claim to be the premier successor state of the Orthodox world, a title they would use for all sorts of things, including claiming to be a third Rome. Although frankly, considering Bulgaria claimed to be a successor state of Rome, claiming to be a successor of Rome isn't that hard. Watch. It's me. I am the successor to Rome. Personally, I did it. Anyway, discussing the history of religion during the early modern period is, as most things, beyond the scope of the channel, but needless to say was indeed central during this time. And again, EU4 doesn't disappoint. Religions have significant impacts on not just modifiers on screen, but on everything from available estate privileges such as Catholic diplomats, and even access to whole estates like the Dhimmi. Furthermore, whole mechanics like personal unions are locked behind religions. The faith of your empire determines what great projects you have access to. It impacts certain government reforms and impacts which nation you can form, ranging from you needing to reform away from Catholic to form Prussia, to requiring Sunni to form the Mughals. Religion is ever present. If you're playing Tour in the Netherlands or Italy, you are dealing with the religious conflicts happening around you, if not inside of you. If you're playing a colonizer, you're colonizing people that aren't necessarily Christian. Not yet anyway, you're working on it. A world conquest has you conquer incredible amounts of different religions, and indeed one of the aspects of managing your world conquest unless you're Lambda and you finished in 1472 to be clear, is, well, managing the religion of your subjects, either through conversion or tolerance. Now, of course, with power creep, both options get significantly easier. Religious unity as a percentage modifier is now painfully easier to stack in a world conquest due to all the monuments, for example, but nevertheless, religion mechanics are well developed, well fleshed out with a lot of flavor to boot. Again, EU4 as a game does well here, both representing the religious conflicts and still subtly inspiring the player to go pursue expansion in a different religion due to modifiers like warfare against other religions and aggressive expansion being reduced if the nation doesn't share the religion. Overall, I do think that EU4 suffers more than CK2 or CK3 does by also having religion per province be an all or nothing affair, so Constantinople is either 100% Orthodox or 100% Sunni, or 100% Shinto if you're doing a Shinto 1 faith, but otherwise it is a very dynamic system which arguably could be improved potentially to the CK3 level of individual doctrines, but let's be clear, for the scope of EU4 that would be redundant. Well, another 9 out of 10 for me, but you see, religion would not always play a dominant role in human society. Now, certainly there are reasons beyond loving Jesus that compelled an Italian to partake in a crusade, and similar alternative reasons that compelled the Spaniards to enlighten the people of South America about Jesus. But as industrialization arrived, humans gained new compelling reasons to stab each other. Ideology, aka disagreements over how the world was to be governed, and more importantly by who was meant to be governed, were growing. And while faith certainly did exist, by the time we hit Hearts of Iron 4, well, it certainly would be downright stupid to argue that the Germans invaded Poland because the Poles were Catholics. Bear in mind too, this is occurring during a period where one of the 4 optional ideologies according to the game, communism, as a core tenet of its existence, rejects the premise of God on principle. But indeed, religion certainly was still something that existed, and references to it can be found throughout the game, like church minister advisors that one could employ, to Turkish national spirits demonstrating the growing conflict between the secular post-Ataturk state and still very much believing in Allah majority Turkish population. Japan's first national spirit is still state Shintoism after all, and indeed here it is hard to offer genuine criticism, for compared to the events of World War II, asking how do we model religion is pretty far low on the priority list of making a fun and engaging World War II game. Religion's role outside of maintaining home morale perhaps at this point was pretty minimal, and I'm rounding up here, a factor reflected in Hearts of Iron 4. But with this kind of intermission over, let's get to the fun and games where real life examples and sober themes go straight out the window. Stellaris. Stellaris. Paradox's answer to what happens when you finish your world conquest. You go conquer the galaxy now. Given that Stellaris' policy towards what sci-fi theme are we going to rip off this update is all of them. Also, while you're over there, go steal sieging from EU4 but call it archaeology, I decided. It is somewhat refreshing to see that all different bands of religion from all the types of sci-fi is shoved under the spiritualist ethic, which encompasses everything from that one person that went backpacking through Laos and is now spiritual but not religious, and false and fanatical purifiers believing that their path to religious salvation is to destroy every other species in the galaxy. An ironically pretty accurate guess, as the enemy of every Stellaris campaign is lag, and removing trillions of people from the face of the galaxy is actually a very good thing for performance, and hence, ironically enough, prolongs the average Stellaris campaign, and hence the survivability of this fanatic purified spiritualist. Now, I do find it somewhat unusual that only nations that are spiritual are able to build temples, but I guess I can pass that off as a state-sponsored church, and spiritual pops in non-spiritual worlds probably construct their own places of worship depending on the freedoms afforded to them. Furthermore, it does kind of make sense to give spiritual empires access to these temples, aka Unity printers, from a game balance point of view. Well, at least until they go rework trade for the 3rd time and hence change around that funny trade policy that converts trade goods into Unity. Is that still good? What trade rework are we on these days? 1 second, let me consult an industry professional. Okay, after consulting an industry professional, trade is still good. But okay, getting back on track. That whole shroud mechanic Stellaris spiritual empires have access to, their own mini Warhammer 40k warp, but less grimdark, exists. And here I would like to say that I'm kind of disappointed with how non-religious, aka non-spiritualist empires treat the warp, the shroud, and that whole mechanic. Downright, I don't believe in it. If I'm a materialist researcher in a materialist empire and I see a bunch of people going to church praying to Space Jesus, well, I'm going to dismiss them all as being incorrect in their beliefs at best, or downright brainwashed at worst. Now, if Space Jesus starts talking back, I'm probably still going to dismiss it as them going literally insane. But when Space Jesus starts summoning resources from special dimensions and giving the spiritual empire blueprints for advanced religious shields and religious engines that make their spaceships space jump better, well, you know what? I feel like their faith is now going under the jurisdiction of scientific research, thank you very much. Now, I understand why it's done from a game balance point of view, sure, but it gets downright stupid. I had a game where the AI spiritual empire, a fanatic egalitarian spiritual empire, aka super good guys, otherwise known as space Buddhists, signed a deal with the literal space devil and triggered the end of the cycle. No spoilers here, but eventually the reckoning came, and I don't mean in the kind of eternal suffering that they were promised. I mean in the literal form of a ship called the Reckoning, which just starts mass slaughtering everything and everyone. And you know, it's space, so slaughtering just one planet already puts the kill count into the multiple billions. And everyone just ignored it. The AI didn't send their ships to fight it, they just let it absorb them. Now, this is probably some kind of quirk with the innovative Stellaris AI code, so don't worry, it'll be reworked within 3 business days. However, I do find it kind of poetic as an example of everyone that's not religious just straight up ignoring the fact that the spiritual scientists are praying stronger technology into existence. Now, as an individual that did university level math, I do see the appeal of proof by prayer, as it's somewhere up there between proof by induction and proof by professor said it's true in terms of validity of getting your point across. But again, these guys are getting the new and improved extended binomial distribution from the super secret dimension they can only access by praying. Regardless, while I do consider it somewhat unusual, I do say at least it's a fun mechanic and makes for an amusing story. So you know what, Stellaris? Sure, I think other games in the Paradox lineup deal with religion a lot better, but you get a pass because even though you fail, you at least fail in a fun way. But that is all I have time for today. Thank you very much for watching, with a special thank you to my channel members, especially Ark, Solar, Solemon, W. Haste, Sebastian Haller, Chundog 2.0, Nick Haas, Dark Fortuna, Big Salad, Leb Josh, Gay Fook, Zolkok Norse, Golden Arrows, Nanhatan, Awesome Rabbit, Best Pro Gaming, and Grand Admiral Flavia.